Hi, I'm Erika Anderson, co-founder and CCO of Storytell, and we are here with Pierre. Pierre, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure, I'm Pierre Tapia, and I am a group product marketing manager at Adobe, and I work on the Express and Firefly team.
So we're here talking about knowledge workers using AI, essentially. I feel like that's the headline. And I'd love to start with when did you start your AI journey?
Yeah, that's a good question. I started it, I think, once kind of large language models started getting a little bit of momentum. I remember hearing about OpenAI, and I got access to the playground and the API back in the early days of GPT-3, maybe GPT-2, and I was just going in, and it was basically just doing kind of the sentence completion at that point. There was no chat interface. So I would say it's probably a year and a half ago. And at that point, it was mostly a novelty for me. I just thought, this is cool. I was doing the standard use case, like write a poem, or, and I was asking some basic questions, but I didn't have a lot of confidence in the technology at that point. And because the environment I was in was playground, it wasn't all that accessible. And so yeah, but that's when my curiosity was piqued, kick things off.
Okay. Any good poems come out of that?
No, not that I can remember. Certainly better than ones I would write, but yeah.
Okay, so the playground days, and then when did it go from novelty to, oh, I can actually make something valuable out of this for myself?
Yeah, I think there were two inflection points, and they probably happened around the same time. One is I got introduced to Storytell, and through a mutual friend, Sean. And then ChatGPT came out, and so at the point that the chat interface was revealed, I realized oh wow, this makes a lot more sense, the way to interact with this. And that's when I started kind of asking questions, and it started more in the personal domain, just asking questions about, what about this topic, or how should I think about this thing that I heard on the news, to then leveraging it as a professional tool. And I started seeing the possibilities of oh wow, this could really be a brainstorming assistant for any topic, but it's especially good in professional settings. So yeah, it was around that time that my usage of AI started becoming much more frequent. Went from monthly to weekly at that point.
And at what point did it go to daily? Are those memories that you have stored, or is it just I don't know, it's an AI blur, it started to show value and then I was in?
Yeah, there was definitely a continuum, but I think what happened is I gained more confidence in my prompting abilities. I didn't really know how to talk with the AI, and also I didn't know how to give it information that I needed processed. And so I think once I started learning about different techniques for prompting, or what got a good response and what didn't, that is when my usage really ticked up. And then, with Storytell accepting documents of all kinds, I realized that it could go from just being this kind of brainstorming assistant to really being kind of an analysis tool, and that was big. The other thing is, I would say the Storytell Chrome extension was actually one of the big reasons I started using it more often, because at least in the personal domain, I realized, and there's a professional crossover here too, I realized that there's a lot of articles that I read, many of which are professionally focused, that I'm skimming or trying to extract manually the insights, and Storytell was just so good at providing me with the punchline. And I think you called it once you said, it makes it easier to take your medicine, or what's good for you. I forget what it was, because you want to get the good insights out of what you're looking at, and there's a lot of filler that you may not be all that interested in. So that, I would say, got me daily, the prompting, and then just kind of interfaces to AI that were much closer to the work that I was doing.
Yeah, the way you describe that, I almost hear AI came to you, before you had to go to it, and then it could live in you could invite it into your space and your workflows almost. Is that true?
Yeah, I think there was a proliferation of interfaces that made it just much more accessible. Like Storytell's Chrome extension, the chat interface becoming more accessible, the mobile app for OpenAI coming out, I think all of those things kind of put it at my fingertips, and there was far less distance. So yeah, it did come to me. I allowed it in.
Right.
But yeah, there was certainly a proliferation of interfaces, and I think that's so important, is like being as close to the user as you can be, and it felt like it was very easy to get it close to me. So yeah.
I'd love to go back to prompting for a moment. So like, how did you learn how to up level with prompting to go from the initial interactions to like even what you've created around how to create these power prompts?
Yeah, part of it was trial and error. Just in particular, I wanted to get the AI to sound like me, to take on my voice, and I realized that required a bit of cajoling and some nuance. And so, I think now it's maybe more well known than it was before, but there's kind of an AI tone. If something is produced in AI, you can kind of detect it's a little too formal. Sometimes the adjectives are a bit too descriptive or wordy, and so yeah, I had to do a lot of trial and error to figure out how do I get it to sound a bit more practical and grounded and casual. And so that was part of the journey. The other thing was I was just following a bunch of like AI people on Twitter, and so I was looking for how they would do their prompts and looking for techniques, and then I was monitoring the research on prompting too. Things like chain of thought prompting or like step back prompting. There's a variety of like formal methods for prompting that are supposed to elicit more accurate results. And so I was just playing with all of those, but a lot of it was very organic. There wasn't like a prompt guide. I've seen a few on Twitter, but trial and error has always been my main approach for things. So
right.
Yeah.
But it seems like research-wise, you did like go deep, or just like this an area of great curiosity to you that you like leaned into.
Yes.
Yeah.
Definitely.
There's one thing I know at one point we were talking about prompting and how it actually takes a lot of like deep understanding of the language you're working in and the subtleties to do that like AI detection. Like, that sounds like an LLM.
Right. Yeah.
That just, I don't know, filing that away.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I've seen now my employees use it for some writing, for some emails that are a bit more formal or that need to go to leadership and they want to use it kind of as an assistant to help there. And there are times when I'll have to edit it down so it sounds a bit more grounded. Yeah, it's an interesting thing. There's this idea in the 3D space of the uncanny valley where like if something looks almost realistic but not quite, it's more repulsive than if it looks very cartoony but is not realistic at all. And humans basically have a very high standard for what is real. And I feel like there's going to be a similar phenomenon in AI where people, kind of AI sounding things will begin to stink a little bit because you'll be like, this person cheated in producing this content.
Right.
That could just be a projection of my own psyche, but I think, you want writing to feel authentic. And so that I think will always be a need. But also LLMs may get better at that, right? So.
Yeah.
But the context matters. And,
right.
That matters a lot. And so, yeah.
Do you have, so it's like, okay, we hit those inflection points around like Storytell, ChatGPT, like starting to see it makes us turn from novelty to I can actually use this, I can get value from this, starting in my personal life and moving over into professional. Do any like initial instances of that come to mind as we go from novelty to, wait a minute, I'm gonna lean into this. It's gonna go from monthly to weekly to daily, or like, oh, I'm stuck on this, and like, I don't know what that initial use case would have been for you.
Yeah, I think I'm thinking back to one of the early kind of ways that I used it, and oftentimes I'm being asked for kind of a synthesis or an analysis of some particular thing in business. And it could be, we just launched a new offer and we want to see how is it performing. And a lot of the times, you know, defeating the blank page is hard, and so you're thinking, what framework can I impose here that will make things easier? Where it becomes a bit more of fill in the blank for me than just kind of starting from scratch and putting words down and then rearranging. And so I remember for one synthesis in particular, I asked like the LLM for an outline, and it gave me such a good outline, and I thought, I should really be trying to use this in every workflow. And just like, this is the future, clearly. I need to make it a personal mandate where I'm using AI to try to accomplish everything and finding the limits of it that way. And I remember that being a very important inflection point where I was like, okay, can I do this with AI? And that also made my work a bit more enjoyable and curious and exploratory. So it was fun for that reason. And that's when I started leaning more into Storytell, leaning more into kind of my own little scripting and coding and trying to figure out what I could stitch together, just to see what I could get done. Yeah.
I love how you put that of defeating the blank page. Like, it's this, I don't know, boogeyman or something that I feel like it instills fear, and then we turn away and go do something else because we need that starting point.
Yeah.
Yeah. So where are you from? Okay, so it's like, oh, how should I use AI for this? So this should be in all my workflows. Like, where are you right now with like how many workflows it's a part of for you? What does your daily life with AI look like now?
Yeah, I would say I'm opening up some chat interface probably once a day at a minimum. And a few dozen times a week. And I'm leveraging it all the time. And that habit of like, can I use AI for this is much more ingrained. So I'll use it for simple things. You know, I'll write an email and I'll think the email is pretty good, but I'll say, you know, I'm gonna give it to the AI to clean it up. Just see how it does. And oftentimes it'll produce a more logical and structured email because I've told it to do that with a very good prompt, of course. But yeah, I use it for small things, and then I use it for big things. You know, there's a boundary which we can get into around like the quantity of data that I can give it, or the confidentiality that I believe will be kind of ensured if I provide data to a third party, like particularly Adobe data. I have to be very careful around that because we have strict policies around what can be outside the org, and so my use cases are a bit limited by that. And so that is, that is kind of one challenge to like me using it more often. But I would say for anything that doesn't require any kind of privileged information, I'm trying to find out, can I use AI to make it even better, or to accelerate this, even by shaving off 10 minutes or 15 minutes. Those things add up by the end of the day.
So let's step a little deeper into your world, because we're talking about things maybe more in an abstract mode. So you're a product marketer here at Adobe, and just bringing us in to what does that look like and feel like in terms of workflows, and then we're going to do a 3-part. So bring us into your world, and then what are some of those like pain points or challenges or obstacles that you run into with your workflows, and how would you like to partner with AI around that in future?
Yeah, I mean, so at a high level, I think most product marketers are responsible for having just a very deep understanding of their audience and the motivations, the needs, the use cases, the demographics, like where they sit. And I'm a B2B marketer, business to business, and so I have to understand kind of the firmographic outlay, and there's just a lot of kind of characteristics about the user and the environment they sit in that have to be computed. And then we translate that into a strategy, and the strategy has a number of components, but the two primary ones are the go-to-market. How are we going to reach this user, speak to them, make them aware of the benefits, etc. And then the product strategy, where we partner with the product team to let them know, hey, here are the things that we think our users would really benefit from. How can we build this into the product? How can we make this a more complete solution, etc. So that's kind of the scope of my responsibilities in a nutshell, along with other things. But I would say that in that workflow, some of the hard things are kind of getting an analysis, a synthesis of who that audience is. And especially at a company like Adobe, where we have a long history, we've got a lot of data, we've got a lot of usage, we know a lot about the market, and we have a lot of research too, both qualitative and quantitative. How do you bring all that together to tell the most accurate story about who your audience is and what they need? And right now, that requires a lot of just manual synthesis, kind of like combing through documents, extracting the most salient pieces, bringing them together, and then socializing them with teams that have owned pieces of that understanding to make sure that you're representing it properly. And it's just a huge lift to get there. And it's kind of the same thing even as you're forming on the strategy formation side, like we talked about go-to-market and product strategy. Even in those cases, there's a lot of things that have to be computed. On the go-to-market side, you have to understand what the priorities of the other teams are, how they're looking at strategy for next year, where you sit. You know, if you're typically in a company of this size, you own a sliver of something. Where do you sit relative to their other priorities? What data do they have that shows potential opportunities to optimize? Markets that are performing well, markets that have some momentum. And then on the product side, you know, lots of analytics, lots of customer verbatims. So it's really about bringing this together to come up with a cohesive strategy and then updating that strategy periodically and informing stakeholders and like how the strategy is evolving or how initial hypotheses we had have been proven or disproven. So
that's a lot.
That's a lot, yeah.
Like I just to share what I'm hearing you say is almost like there's a spider web of information coming in, and then you have to fan out and align with all of the stakeholders, and you need to do all of that to bring this like into signal to like the story, the accurate story that you're trying to tell, except for the truth is always changing. Like you have to stay up to date with the latest research that's coming in through this like spider web of information. It almost makes me think of a continuous delivery pipeline.
Yeah.
I don't know, does that reflect what you're sharing?
Totally, yeah. Yeah, I mean at a very abstract level, there's just a constant flow of information. We occasionally have to do munging of that info to produce a synthesis of like, here is the state-of-the-art understanding that we have about X topic. And then we have to update that. And then there's the job of socializing that and getting buy-in, and then even incorporating input that might be relevant, context that might be relevant to that. So yeah, that totally resonates. And then you asked like, how do I envision kind of AI playing a role in this? I mean, I imagine there will be some point in the future where all of this data will be channeled into, let me state it differently, where a large language model will have access to all of this data. And I think that, yeah, and so I imagine that at some point in the future, I'll be able to ask questions, and it won't be so much the quality of my synthesis, it'll be more the quality of the question that I ask and the context that I provide that will drive the progress, because the synthesis, a lot of that initial synthesis will be done by a machine, because it can see so many more relationships across concepts than I can. So that's how I would like it to work. You know, yeah, and if I'm thinking even more ahead, like for an AI to dynamically create content and then update it, looking at those repositories that it had tapped, looking at the data sources that it had tapped, and refreshing that periodically for me, or notifying me, alerting me of significant changes, that would make my life a lot easier.
I'm almost hearing like a dashboard or something that would constantly be updated by AI, along with these like push notifications tapping you on the shoulder when things are maybe at the extremes. Does that align with what you're wanting, or is it a little bit different?
Yeah, I think so. I think a report and a dashboard.
Mm-hmm.
I think that a narrative is still required for socialization, and the large language models today are so good at generating narratives that I would want them to also give me the upfront summary. So I wouldn't want to just see like a sea of figures if
Sure.
there were this future solution. I would want to see like, what does this mean? But then a dashboard would be helpful as well. Like, here's an aggregated view of the insights that we've collected across all the data or all the repositories. And so yeah, something like a dashboard and a report.
Yeah, and I'm hearing like with the summary, like guide me into this. Don't just like throw me at a wall of numbers or data or something.
Exactly.
Yeah. So the reason I mentioned dashboard wasn't completely innocent. As you may know, we've been working on smart views as the near future direction of Storytell, and really looking at what we're building as an amplitude for unstructured qualitative data, because largely those meeting transcripts and notes, if they're taken, end up having no value in their current state. It's just scattered everywhere. Yeah. And so gathering that into one meeting place and getting signal out of that and being able to like understand signal from qualitative data, because often, like you've I think brought up, that's where the context is. And so if you're just looking at numbers, you're missing context.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, it sounds great. I mean, like, I think that that's the hard part, right? It's easier to do an analysis when it's all numbers, but so much of the signal comes from words. And honestly, like what customers are saying and syntheses that other people have done, very thoughtful, elaborate syntheses, and it is really hard to navigate through 30, 40 slides or an 8-page report and extract those insights, but machines are great at it, and so I love that vision. It's great.
Do you remember the person's name? Said every business is a language business?
Yeah, that was the co-founder, Greg Brockman, the co-founder of OpenAI. Every business is a language business, every business has language workflows. And then also I think talking a little bit about the mashup of the quantitative, like spreadsheet structured data and the qualitative data together. I mean, that's something that like just on this call that I was on over here,
sure.
We're just starting to explore. He literally, maybe even tell that story. We were just talking to somebody who uploaded a PDF of 114-page PowerPoint deck and this huge spreadsheet of like years of data, and was asking Storytell about, to draw parallels between the two.
Yeah, I think we're switching roles now. You're interviewing.
Yeah.
But I think, just to share a little bit more on that line, because we've been in this unstructured qualitative data space. That's been what we have thought we're owning, and actually just before we came to talk to you today, we're on a call where someone was taking a CSV, just of like massive database, and mashing it up with qualitative data, so we could have both the numbers and the context coming together. So we're just starting to see the possibilities of what happens when those two things come together as well.
Yeah, that's super neat. I mean, and you can't have one without the other, right? And especially at a company like Adobe, we have a very close pulse on the numbers, and so much of the business is run by the numbers. But when we have to do quarterly strategy planning, annual strategy planning, or quarterly strategy updates, we require both. And so that's it really resonates with me, this idea of like, computers are good at computing numbers, and now they're great at analyzing language. If you can bring the two together, it's powerful.
Like, what do you think stands in the way of knowledge workers adopting AI or starting to have it like you in their daily workflows?
Yeah, I think part of it is just kind of education, because I think a lot of folks don't know how to get the real power out of the AI. Your CTO, Jing, who's awesome, has told this story, which Rodeo's repeated many times, of like, you need to reach into the LLM and pull out the exact knowledge. And I think that that's so apt, because the prompt, the quality of the prompt it basically defines the precision of that reach. And I think a lot of knowledge workers don't know how to write good prompts. Or they're maybe just don't have the time or don't want to put forward the energy to think through. Writing well is a skill, and it takes time, and not everybody's great at it. And even I'm constantly learning new ways to improve the prompts. But I think that there are also probably opportunities for AI to help you improve your prompts and do that automatically. And I've seen some companies kind of do a little bit of that. But so education is part of it, how to write better prompts. I think the other thing is they have to get comfortable with the privacy and the confidentiality. I think most folks, are not very comfortable with giving things just openly to a third party, especially if they work for a regulated company, it's publicly traded. And so I think that they're going to have to get past some of those reservations and understand how secure it is. Some of that will come through companies sanctioning it, and some of it will come through, kind of services giving very credible assurance. Maybe some of that will come with open source models that are locally hosted, or where there's kind of zero knowledge by the provider of the information. Maybe some of it will come through sanitization, like Sparkle, where people will have more comfort. But I've heard several people say, like, oh, I just don't want to give it that data, especially when it comes to quantitative data, because that stuff is really important. So is qual, but yeah, quantitative even more so for this concern. And then besides that, I would say the third one is maybe just greater accessibility, and both in terms of like the interfaces getting better and more intuitive, and the support for various inputs becoming more expansive. So CSVs, PDFs, recordings, audio. I think, especially with like the multimodal large language models that are coming out, I think the possibilities are just becoming even broader. So I would say those are the three top ones that come to mind.
Yeah, I just hear a lot of like lowering the barriers, like this necessity of lowering barriers around education, around comfort or clarity with confidentiality and privacy. And also, as you're speaking to multimodal, this has been a text-based universe. And so we live in a video and visual world. And so what happens to adoption and usage as we go into multimodal?
Yeah, exactly.